Hello learners, this is Professor Warsi from the Department of Linguistics, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Our today's lecture is about language and gender. This lecture is a part of the course Migrated Women's Writings. So let us begin our today's lecture. Language and gender have a complex relationship, one that has been the subject of extensive research and debate. This relationship is not static but evolves over time, reflecting societal changes and power dynamics. Research into the relationship between language and gender identity in applied linguistics and sociolinguistics has evolved considerably since its emergence in the 70s. Initially, the focus was on demonstrating that power inequalities between the sexes were reflected in the language women were socialized into using and finding evidences for and explaining linguistic differences between the sexes. Language is more than a set of words and rules of communication. It is a mirror of societal norms and values. It reflects and often reinforces gender roles, subtly shaping our understanding of what it means to be male, female, or something else. For example, the words and phrases we use for describing strength or emotion, authority, or gentleness often carry associations with gender. These associations can reinforce traditional views on gender by suggesting who should be assertive and who should be nurturing and who leads and who follows. Historically, language has been a medium through which society's gender expectations are communicated and reinforced. Consider how words like doctor or nurse may unconsciously bring to mind a specific gender, or how terms like bossy versus assertive are often applied differently based on gender. These linguistic patterns are not random. They stem from centuries of gender norms embedded in our language, guiding how we see ourselves and each other. But language is also a powerful tool for change. Just as it can reinforce the stereotypes, it can also be used to challenge them. In recent years, we have seen shifts in language aimed at promoting inclusivity, such as the use of gender-neutral pronouns and language reforms within various cultures. These changes reflect society's evolving view of gender and encourage us to think beyond binary roles. As our understanding of gender has evolved, so has our use of language. For example, gender-neutral terms like firefighter instead of fireman and the use of they as a singular pronoun reflect efforts to move away from outdated assumptions. These shifts in language signal broader social changes as society increasingly values inclusivity and recognizes the diversity of gender identities and expressions. Language also plays a crucial role in shaping our perceptions and behaviors. As Wittgenstein famously stated, if we spoke a different language, we would perceive a somewhat different world. This idea is particularly relevant when examining how gendered language can influence performance outcomes. In many languages, including Hebrew, gender is encoded in various grammatical forms which can signal the prototypical individual as male. This can lead to the activation of a stereotype threat where individuals perform worse than they are aware of negative stereotypes about their gender. The study of language and gender is a rich and evolving field that examines how language reflects, constructs, and challenges gender identities and power dynamics. This area of research has grown significantly since its inception, particularly influenced by the feminist movement of 70s and 80s, which highlighted the differences in communication styles between women and men. Early scholarship, often categorized under difference feminism, posited that linguistic differences were indicative of social inequalities, with scholars like Lakoff and his work of 1975 arguing that features of women's language, such as hedges and tag questions, reflected a subordinate social status. Throughout this talk, we will consider some key questions like how does language shape our perceptions of gender? Do people use language differently based on gender? And importantly, what can a study these differences tell us about broader social dynamics? So, understanding this intersection of language and gender not only reveals a lot about societal norms but also highlights potential paths toward greater inclusivity and equality. To understand the connection between language and gender, it is essential to consider the theories and historical shifts that have shaped this field of study. Language and gender research emerged as an area of interest in 70s, notably influenced by pioneering linguists and sociologists who began to examine how language both reflects and reinforces social structures, including gender roles. This historical and theoretical foundation gives us important insights into how language has traditionally reinforced gender roles and power structures, as well as how it continues to evolve as our understanding of gender becomes more complex. One of the foundational work in this area is Language and Women's Space by Lakoff, published in 1975. Lakoff's work introduced the idea of women's language, a term she used to describe specific linguistic features that she argued were characteristic of how women were expected to speak. According to Lakoff, these features include the use of hedges like sort of, kind of, tag questions such as it's nice, isn't it? Polite forms and a lack of assertiveness. She argued that these language patterns mirrored the subordinate social position of women at the time. Her work was groundbreaking because it highlighted the several ways that language can reflect and perpetuate gender inequalities. While some of her claims were later critiqued for being overly generalized, Lakoff's research opened up a new area of inquiry into the ways language can reinforce societal expectations around gender. Following Lakoff, scholars proposed more structured theories to explain gender differences in language. Two of the most influential theories that emerged were dominance theory and difference theory. Talking about the dominance theory, which championed by scholars like Dale Spender, suggests that differences in men's and women's language arise from unequal power dynamics. According to this theory, linguistic patterns such as who interrupts whom, who speaks more, and who holds the floor in conversations are reflections of broader societal power imbalances between gender. Spendel in particular argued that language is man-made and that the way language is structured reflects male dominance. For example, words like master or king often have a strong positive connotations, while their female counterparts like mistress or queen may have more ambiguous or negative ones. This theory highlights how language can be a tool for maintaining the status quo and reinforcing gendered power hierarchies. In contrast, The difference theory developed by researchers like Deborah Tannen focuses on the socialization process that boys and girls undergo from young age, which shapes their distinct communication styles. In her influential work, You Just Don't Understand, published in 1990, Tannen argues that men and women develop different linguistic styles not because of power struggles, but because they are socialized to prioritize different conversational goals. According to Tannen, men often prioritize status and independence, resulting in competitive or assertive speech patterns, while women often prioritize connection and intimacy, leading to more collaborative and empathetic style. This perspective, while not denying societal power differences, emphasizes that the distinct ways men and women communicate are based on contrasting but equally valid conversational approaches shaped by social expectation. To understand the nuances of language and gender, we need to look at the specific language features and speech patterns that have been studied in gendered communication. Research has identified patterns, tendencies in how men and women use language, though it's important to remember that these are general trends, not universal rules. Gendered language patterns, whether in vocabulary choices, conversational styles, or nonverbal communication, reflect broader social expectations about gender. Understanding these features can help us recognize how language both mirrors and perpetuates these norms and perhaps find ways to challenge a stereotype in our communication. Looking at the vocabulary choice, one of the areas where gendered language differences are often noted is in vocabulary and word choices. Lackoff's pioneering research in 1975 highlighted specific language features that she called women's language. According to Lackoff, women tend to use more politeness markers, tag questions, hedges, and intensifiers compared to men. If you look at the politeness, we see that women are often socialized to use polite forms as a way of maintaining social harmony. For instance, phrases like "could you please" or "would you mind if" are seen as markers of politeness and difference, aligning with social expectations that women should be considerate and less assertive. Referring to tag questions, phrases like "it's nice, isn't it" are used to seek confirmation or soften statements. Tag questions can make statements sound less assertive, which can reflect societal expectations that discourage women from speaking too directly. Talking about hedges, words like "sort of," "kind of," and "maybe" are often used to soften statements or make them seem less forceful. While men and women both use hedges, women are typically socialized to use them more frequently as a way of appearing less confrontational. Then, talking about intensifiers, words like "so," "really," and "very" are used to add emphasis. Studies suggest that women use intensifiers more often, which could be due to expectations for women to express enthusiasm or emotional investment in conversations. These vocabulary choices contribute to a perception of women's language as softer or more differential, reflecting societal expectations that shape gendered speech patterns. Then, talking about conversational style, beyond vocabulary, men and women are more often found to have distinct conversational styles that reflect different socialization experiences. Two key areas of focus are overlaps and interruption, and the tendency toward direct versus indirect communications. So, looking at overlap and interruptions, numerous studies have suggested that in mixed gender conversations, men interrupt more frequently than women. Research in this area suggests that interruptions are often tied to power dynamics. Because society tends to position men as more authoritative, they may feel more entitled to control the flow of conversation. Women, on the other hand, may be socialized to avoid interruptions as a way of being polite and maintaining harmony in discussions and conversations. Looking at the direct versus indirect communication, men are often associated with more direct forms of communication, while women may use more indirect language. This difference is influenced by social expectations. Men are often encouraged to be assertive and get to the point, while women may use indirect language to avoid seeming overly assertive. For example, instead of saying, "I disagree," a woman might phrase it as, "I am not sure I see it that way." So, softening her stance, these tendencies can contribute to misunderstanding, especially in professional settings where direct communication is often valued and preferred. Looking at nonverbal communication, that nonverbal cues also play a significant role in gendered communication, encompassing body language, tone, and even the strategic use of silence. These nonverbal behavior can reinforce or challenge societal expectations about gender. Talking about body language, that research shows that men and women often adopt different body language styles. For example, men may take up more physical space as a way of signaling confidence, while women may use more restrained or closed postures. This can reflect the socialization of men towards assertiveness and dominance, while women are encouraged to display modesty or deference. Tone is another aspect, like tone of the voice. So, tone is another area where gender differences appear. Women are often encouraged to use a more pleasant, warm tone to appear friendly. Men, conversely, may be expected to use a more authoritative or firm tone, especially in professional context. High-pitched tones in women's speech are sometimes interpreted as a sign of politeness, while deeper tones in men's speech are often associated with authority. Talking about silence, that too can carry different meanings based on gender. For women, silence is often expected as a form of politeness or deference. Men, however, may use silence strategically to assert control or dominance in conversations. For example, a man might stay silent after a statement to complete the other person to speak or explain further, which can establish a sense of authority in the interaction. Societal expectations around appropriate communication is another aspect. Each of these speech and nonverbal patterns reflects societal norms about what is considered appropriate communication for men and women. Men are often expected to be direct, assertive, and confident, using language that signals authority. Women, on the other hand, are often expected to communicate in ways that prioritize harmony, politeness, and empathy. These norms can lead to biases in perception, with direct women sometimes being seen as too aggressive and indirect men being seen as unassertive. These expectations shape how men and women use language, and they impact the way we perceive others based on their communication styles.